I learned about Viditya Voletti's Bloodbeam Badlands last year when I was researching Dicebreaker's nominees for Rising Star tabletop designers, and was immediately sold on its concept. People sometimes make fun of the indie tabletop scene for the esoteric and odd games we sometimes put out, but Badlands is a prime example of why that weirdness is the best part of independent game design. The setting is this. You play vampires in the post-apocalypse, wandering an endless desert scorched by nuclear radiation. The sun, warped by the last vestiges of humanity's arguments, burns red and endless, a forever day always dawning on the ruined earth. Together, you and your fellow vampires wander the wastes, driven by your thirst for blood, fighting cultists and dinosaurs, struggling to make it through another day. It's a pitch that objectively rules, but one thing I found interesting was that it's not an especially original pitch, not when segmented into its three constituent genres. I think it's pretty common for folks to say that there's nothing truly original anymore, that every story has already been told. And while there's certainly debate to be had about that, I think Bloodbeam Badlands is an excellent lesson in why, even if that's true, it doesn't matter. This game takes three fantasies and mashes them together into something far more than the sum of its parts. I want to examine why that is, and why it works so well.
To the town of our free rode a stranger one fine day.
Valetti doesn't shy away from his inspirations in Bloodbeam Badlands. Fallout, The Mandalorian, Red Dead Redemption, Heart and Spire, The Witcher. It's an impressive list, but I think it boils down into three types of fantasy that have been popular over the years, at least in the United States. Vampires, westerns, and nuclear apocalypse have each captured our imaginations, inspiring us to dream of exciting and dangerous possibilities. Let's break down each of these fantasies, find out what's appealing about them, and see how Valetti integrated these themes and tropes into the game. The most obvious fantasy at the heart of Bloodbeam Badlands is that of becoming a vampire. Vampire the Masquerade is probably the most popular TTRPG in the vampire genre, but that there is a distinction between media where vampires are antagonists and media in which vampirism is aspirational speaks to some interesting impulses. You can read vampirism as fear of the foreign, submission to sexual desire, a rejection of morality, specifically Christianity. But in stories like Twilight, What We Do in the Shadows, and True Blood, those themes that are considered taboo are kind of the whole point. You never get to go to heaven because you're immortal. You don't have to. You have a natural strength and special powers drawn from the life force of others. You have to stay in the dark and wear cool black clothes to protect your edgy secret. And I can't personally speak to the inherent queerness of vampire stories, but it's not subtle. And that rules. The fantasy of vampirism is, as Laszlo so eloquently puts it, to suck blood and fuck forever. The second fantasy is a little thornier. Valetti explicitly does not want to evoke the Western genre with Badlands, as media of that oeuvre tends to gloss over the racism, genocide, and exploitation that went into American expansion into lands held by the Cheyenne, Pueblo, Shoshone, and myriad other native peoples. Badlands seeks to take only one element from those stories, that of quick-drawn gunslingers. When focusing on the shootouts, I can't deny the gun battles of Red Dead Redemption and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly appeal to me on a visceral, base level. Humans have been dueling for millennia, but the codification of dueling in Europe gave the practice a veneer of respectability, quote-unquote civilizing what was once a barbaric struggle into a gentlemanly test of skill. I think gunslinging, especially in the fantasy of the Western, adds a little grit back into duels, showing them for the blood sports that they are. There are always good guys with their dashing looks, and bad guys with their black hats. At the end of the day, it comes down to speed and firepower. I think in a world as restricted by arbitrary laws as ours, where the people who do the most harm are far removed from the suffering they cause, it's hard not to long for a way to settle grievances in a terse, bloody showdown. The last fantasy of Bloodbeam Badlands is one of apocalypse survivalism, specifically surviving a nuclear apocalypse. There's a lot of crossover with zombie media when comparing apocalypse fantasies, an ever-present, unstoppable threat that's permanently altered the environment, societies that have broken down and rebuilt themselves into strange new forms to compensate for the altered world, and the scarcity that comes with the sudden annihilation of the supply chain, awarding those with the resourcefulness and know-how to improvise. The difference with a nuclear apocalypse is all in the flavor text. Instead of hordes of undead, your foes are mutated creatures, boasting superpowers and additional limbs. You don't just need body armor, You need lead-lined suits and Geiger counters to protect yourself from radiation. Clean water is leagues more valuable than cash or gold. The most prominent example of this kind of apocalypse fiction for me is undoubtedly the Fallout franchise, which wears the inherent silliness of the nuclear fantasy on its sleeve. Like Fallout, Badlands is much more interested in exaggerated animals and nigh magical abilities than the reality of slow, excruciating death by radiation poisoning. One caveat. Valetti is well aware of the harmful stereotypes and ideologies some of these fantasies come out of, explicitly addressing them in text. Vampires can be read as violating sexual consent. Apocalypse media often glorifies suffering. Westerns are mega racist. Badlands plays in the same genre spaces as these fantasies, but has no interest in codifying their worst aspects. I'm glad Badlands goes out of its way to talk about the media that precede it. I don't know if any media inspired by genres with ugly tropes can fully escape the shadow of their predecessors, but I am glad they're trying. I think there's something to be said from picking and choosing the best aspects of stories with gross elements and forging them into something inspired by, but distinct from, their source material. Okay, that's a lot of setup, but I think it's important to contextualize Bloodbeam Badlands' mechanics and setting. Because when viewed through the lens of the media it's drawing inspiration from, the game does a great job of rehashing the most exciting and over-the-top aspects of its tripartite fantasy into something unique, but still feels like playing in those same spaces. In the most straightforward sense, Badlands starts you precisely at the intersection of these genres. You play as irradiated vampires, with guns, wandering a wasteland blighted by an implied nuclear war disaster. The forever day is always now, its turbo-nuclear sun constantly baking the planet with mutagenic rays, which begins the game's first real mechanical complication. As vampires, it's a huge problem for you that the sun never sets anymore. At the start of each day, you try to roll under your burn resource, which represents how close you are to death. Even a successful roll reduces the source, whereas a failure reduces your other two sources, blood and bullets, as well. This is the ticking clock spurring you on to your adventures. If your burn runs out, you either crumble to dust, or receive a further mutation and reduction to your total burn, so it's imperative that you keep that number as high as possible by seeking out non-irradiated sources of blood, or finding shelter in total darkness. Already, before characters make any choices, they're forced to reckon with the fact of their ever-approaching deaths, which completely clicks with both the vampire and apocalypse genres. Instead of fresh water slowly dwindling away, players start by scrambling for pure blood or total darkness, struggling to meet their vampiric needs while the world decays around them. In order to slake their thirst, players will need to find blood and shelter. Maybe you can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement with some farmers, protection in exchange for a few shots of cow's blood. But in all likelihood, you'll find yourself up against magical despots, prehistoric terrors, and other varmints who'd rather spill blood than trade it. In a setting populated by desperate and hostile enemies, Badlands gives players a slate of options to tackle obstacles, which boil down into vampiric superpowers and cool guns. Players choose one of 4 bloodline abilities: Transubstantiate, which grants you the power to unleash a truly monstrous form; Umbral Shift, which allows you to move into and through shadows, turning them into weapons in and of themselves; Verisimmutate, which allows you to consume the memories of those you're psychically linked to; and Phantom Blood, which, as the name suggests, grants you the power to host phantasms inside your veins. And if your dark magics fail you, there's always dark magics delivered from the barrel of a 6-shooter. Seeking ammo, incendiary ammo, werewolf blood bullets, bullets that hold your target in place with the spirits of the damned, and ammo that lets you swap places with your bullet mid-flight. The mechanics of using these tools are not complicated, as most checks require players to roll under a source value using a number of dice dictated by their stats. If you've checked out games using the resistance system, like Spire or Heart, you won't have any trouble grasping the core gameplay loop. But the verbs Badlands gives players to interact with the world suggest methods of conflict resolution that would slot perfectly into Van Helsing or New Vegas. The kinds of enemies you're fighting in this game are abominable, mean, and have no compunction about leaving you a smoking ruin in the dust. In response, you're given your own arsenal of eldritch abilities and deadly armaments to wreak havoc upon the land. And that's part of the fantasy, right? Vampires are cool and sexy because they have terrible powers that make them so hard to kill, except with specific techniques. Gunslingers are magicians in their own rights, blasting lead and dropping bandits as fast as they can pull the trigger. And in an apocalypse, surrounded by mutated monsters and merciless warlords, no options are off the table. If you've got them, you better damn well smoke 'em. Lastly, the tone and flavor of Bloodbeam Badlands enemies are the pinnacle of its 3 genre touchstones. The piece of art that immediately sold me on the game was this drawing of a Tyrannosaurus with a gun for a head. I cannot stress enough how little else I needed to know about the game after seeing this monster, who is canonically named Revolver Face. It's an incredibly efficient method of conveying the kind of game Badlands is supposed to be. We have a dinosaur, so we know that the game either involves weird science, magic, or takes place in a world unlike our own. And we know that its head is a gun, which is exactly the kind of Saturday morning cartoon villainy Valetti is going for. Now, I haven't actually seen any Chainsaw Man, but I refuse to take any media seriously in which a main antagonist's head is a big fuck-off firearm. And Badlands has no qualms about wearing its goofiness on its sleeve. While there are certainly dramatic, serious moments in westerns and apocalypse fiction, I think this game is more interested in the aspects of these media that are pulpy, over-the-top, and loud. The included sample adventure, In Thrall to the Burning Teeth, is packed full of ridiculous bad guys. A Cyclops with a subwoofer torso, a transatlantic warlock, a Fey King crackling with radiation. These characters might look out of place in The Last of Us, but in Mad Max or Hellboy, they'd just be part of the scenery. Bloodbeam Badlands is the kind of game that makes me glad I started this YouTube channel. It is so weird and colorful and unashamed of its influences, while still acknowledging that its predecessors weren't perfect. It's not hard to be inspired by media that came before, but it is hard to sort through the good, bad, and ugly of those settings, pick out the things that appeal to you most strongly, and fuse those elements into something as earnest and fun as Badlands. This game is just a testament to the creativity and versatility of the indie tabletop scene. If you like vampires, we got you. If you like shootouts, we got you. If you like magic nuclear apocalypses, I already told you about the T-Rex! Bloodbeam Badlands is a joyous text in every sense of the word. Perhaps there's nothing new under the sun. Maybe every story has genuinely already been told. Any creative worth their salt will tell you that doesn't matter at all. I could not care less that Badlands' touchstones aren't especially original. It takes 3 enormous, wildly overdone genres and bashes them into a game that had me grinning from ear to ear. I couldn't ask for more. Thank you to everybody for watching. I really appreciate everyone who takes the time to get to the end of these videos. They take a long time to make, but I hope that you like them. They're fun. If you want to find more of my work, I'm at AaronSXL on Twitter, and my main personal website is aavoigt.com, where I talk about games, writing, and health policy. I also do 2 podcasts. The first is at Mortified Pod, where me and my friend Layla do critical media analysis. We just talked about the 2010 Valentine's Day movie, the one with all the characters and plot lines. I think that movie rules. So come check that conversation out. And I also do another show that's at The Bible Boys, where me and my ex-evangelical friends Michael and Josh talk about Christian media. We are about to talk about the History Channel Bible series, which is going to be wild. So if that seems like something you might be interested in, please check that out. Thank you as always for watching. I hope to have another video out soon. Until then, see ya.